Dave, let me just dive right in. And I will begin with a philosophical question, okay? Church with a capital C, okay? Not our church or your church, but big church.
Yeah.
I believe church has led culture shifts and development over the centuries, okay? And also, over the last 50 years, church has actually been left behind on many things that have been changing.
Yeah.
But regarding online culture, for me, it feels that the church is more like an spectator. It's not leading the changes in that part. Do you think church should be cultivating online culture? Should it be leading it in some kind of way?
Oh, yeah. See, yes, Charlie, you're 100% right. For centuries and centuries, the church were out in front of culture, and literally the world, when it came to culture, 500 years ago, the world followed what the church was doing. But somewhere along the line, I feel like for probably 1,000 reasons in the Western world, that shifted, and now the church is playing catch up on most things, not just online, but most things. And I really truly believe that, Charlie, it is time for the world. It's time for the church to stop being imitators and start being innovators. We have to stop imitating what everybody else is doing, and we have to start innovating. We have the greatest story in the world, and we need to leverage the technology of our day to start sharing that story with more and more people. Now, a lot of us, when COVID hit, I've had the opportunity to talk to like literally thousands of church leaders since COVID hit. And a lot of them were scrambling just to get their services online. You know what I mean? And so they were able to do that. But all they were really doing was taking church and putting it online. And they were wondering why people weren't watching that. But the online medium, what we're doing right now, is really, really different. I could preach a message right now for 30 minutes, but people would switch off, or they'd start, shopping on Amazon or checking emails because of online. So we, as church leaders, I think we have to do more to be clearer in an online medium than we ever would have to do in person. But the benefit of that is exponential reach. We have the opportunity. Paul said that we should go into Jesus said we should go into all the world and preach the good news, right? But unfortunately for a lot of church leaders, because of the stresses that we have just around programming for Sundays, we don't go into all the world. We change that verse to be more something like, Jesus telling us to stay safely in our church building and invite the world to come to us for 1 hour, 1 day a week. But that word that Jesus used, go into all the world, right? First of all, that word go in Hebrew, I don't know if you knew this, Charlie. That word go in Hebrew, I did this comprehensive word study on it. And that word go means go. Like, it just means go. That's all it means. But we have to be intentional about that, right? There's a strategic intentionality around that word go, which interestingly is 2/3 of God's name, right? But he said to go into all the world and preach the good news. And in the modern world, this is all the world.
Yeah.
All the world means YouTube. It means Instagram, it means podcasts, it means Twitter, it means Facebook, it means, a Clubhouse, it means TikTok. That's the world. And I know this firsthand, not just from my experience as a church online social media pastor. I know this as a dad to 3 girls. Because, anybody who's got kids who's listening, anybody who's under maybe the age of 30, you've grown up in a world where you've not known smartphones. And that means that you're making, and my girls, this is certainly true for my girls, making major life discoveries and major life decisions on this. And when my girls are making discoveries about life and they're making decisions about their life in an online space, I want to make sure that the church, the capital C church, aren't just following what the world is doing, but they're actually innovating and creating new content that speaks specifically to the felt needs that my kids have when they're spending all of their life on their phone. Does that make sense?
Because actually when they have a question, they will go there. And that's where the world is happening.
Exactly. And statistics, like to drill down one step further on what you just said, when they are trying to make decisions, they go here, right? But even further on that, there's studies that show that nearly 40% of all online traffic on a cell phone, on a smartphone, is YouTube. Is people streaming YouTube. YouTube has become the, I don't know if you know this, but there was some studies done recently in the US that said that, and when I say recently, like literally it was 2 weeks ago, released in the US that showed that YouTube is now the #1 most active social media platform in the world. Like it surpassed Facebook. People didn't think it would happen for a while, but it's actually happened already. And so this recent study came out to show that I actually wrote down the statistics here so that I could share it with you guys because I wanted it to be as fresh and as up to date as possible, considering I'm in the future and all, right? But it actually showed that 81% of adults in the world are now active on YouTube compared to 69% on Facebook. So YouTube has taken over. And it's also the second biggest search engine in the world. And it's the second biggest, most active website in the world. So if you want to reach people wherever you're listening from, wherever you're watching this Zoomcast from, if you want to reach the people in your local community, there's a really high chance that they're watching YouTube. So the question becomes, how do we innovate as church leaders on a platform like YouTube in order to connect with people who otherwise might not set foot into our churches? And there's lots of different ways we can do that, but we have to change our mindset. This is why I think your question is so important. We have to change our mindset and make sure that the world is not leading us, but that the church actually becomes the innovators and not the imitators.
Yeah, that's so important because at the end, and I remember you saying this some weeks ago in another webinar or video, Paul used the technology that he had at his reach then. It was letters, but now we have so many options to just reach people. And again, that's where they are. And we want to reach people. We don't want to stay with the people that we have already. We know that this is so important. Everybody needs to know.
Yeah, that's so true. You know, it's so interesting to me that there are so many times I get emails or questions on social media or face-to-face connections with pastors and church leaders, and they will say to me things like, hey, should we even, as the church, should we be using this sort of technology? Because there's lots of, not so Christian things on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And should we be driving, should we be suggesting that our church members go there, our church families go there? And that's what I always say to quote you. Yes. I always say that my theology behind Church Online is that Paul used the technology of his day to reach people who are far away from where he was and connect them with each other and connect them with God. Now, like you said, the technology of Paul's day was letter writing, writing letters. So I don't know how old the people are on this phone call, but if you're watching and you're under the age of 30, letter writing is when you get a pencil or a pen and you push it down onto paper and you move your wrist around and it creates, that's letter writing. That was the technology of Paul's day. All I'm suggesting is that we use the technology of our day to do exactly the same thing, connect people with each other and connect people with God. Now, some of the pushback, and I'm sure that you're going to want me to talk about this anyway, Charlie, but some of the pushback I always get when I talk about this is around, in Hebrews, it talks about Hebrews 10:25 says that we should not give up meeting together. And as an online pastor, I would never, ever suggest that online church should replace in-person physical church. I've never said that. I don't know any online pastors who would ever say that. We don't think it's a replacement. It's just an enhancement. It's just taking it one step further. It's helping us stay connected with the people in our church for more than just that 1 hour on Sunday, but staying connected with them and in their life for the other 167 hours of the week. So in that way, we can leverage technology. We can leverage 21st century tools to go back to the first century model that Jesus used to disciple people, which was to be with them 24 hours a day, every day of the week, answering all of their questions. You know, how many times do we see Jesus is walking around with the disciples for 3 years and they've always got questions for him. And all he does is he just answers those questions, and he can do it because he's right there with them. In the modern world, we can be right there with them, just be right here with them, with the people in our.
We are right there together, and you're on the other side of the world, and we're connecting with people over 15 countries right now.
Exactly.
Because we know it's important.
Exactly. Hundreds of people together using technology. Jesus just did it in a really in one place in time, in one location in the world with 12 people. We can now do it, go into all the world. We can literally go into all the world, and in so many ways right now. Charlie, we're going into not all the world, but 15 different countries, hundreds of leaders from churches. We can do that right now. So why don't we leverage this technology to disciple the people in our church who are asking questions online, because they're not asking them in churches anymore, but they're asking questions online about things like, how do I be a better parent? How do I be a better spouse? How can I save my marriage? They're typing into YouTube and Google things like, how can I overcome addiction? How can I stop looking at pornography? How can I find hope in the midst of a pandemic? These are the things they're typing in and asking online. So I think it's time for us as church leaders to really step forward and start innovating the way that we leverage this technology to answer those questions when people need to hear the truth the most.
Wow, it's just so refreshing. And I'm getting comments right now as we speak with people saying, thank you for this moment. Let me just push a little further with what we're talking. Why would you say that marketing and branding is key to churches today? I mean, it sounds, my first thought was, oh, that's too banal. Why should church don't sell products or services. I mean, we want to save souls, but why would it branding and marketing should be important for us?
Yeah, often, in church world, we think that because we're not selling a product, we don't need to worry about branding. We don't need to worry about marketing ourselves. But I would say two things come to mind when you ask me that question. The first one is this. People will connect with your church before they connect within your church. So when a new family moves to your area, or a family that's living in your community that's going through a tough time, when they think about maybe it's time for me to go to church, maybe I need to lean into my faith a little bit more, or maybe I need to go to church for the very first time, 9 times out of 10 in the modern world, they're not going to just walk into your church building. They're probably going to search for you online, right? They're going to look for your website, or they're going to look for your Instagram account, or they're going to look for your Facebook account. And that's what I mean by connecting with the church before they connect within the church. So having good, quote unquote, branding is part of helping them find you online so that they can walk into your doors. It's not that we're peddling a product, but what we are doing is we are offering people a chance to do life better, right? And to have a better life. And that's what I believe, Andy Stanley says this so well: following Jesus makes my life better and has made me better at life. And we want that for the people in our community, but they're never going to get that if they never hear about our community. They never hear what it means to follow Jesus. So there has to be a level of some sort of branding and marketing where we're just letting the people in our community know what our churches are like. Mm-hmm. My church is like this. And if they can look on Facebook, if they can look on Instagram, Charlie, and that new family sees themselves in the photos that are appearing on an Instagram account, like they see people who are like them. Oh, this church has families coming, so I'm a family, so maybe I can go there. That's the sort of marketing that we do. So that's the first thing. It's a way for us to help the community connect with us before they connect within our church building. The second thing is kind of leans a little bit into what I was just saying before. On Google, Charlie, there's this thing called the 0 moment of truth, and that's what Google calls it, 0 moment of truth. And what that is it's a marketing term, but essentially it's the 0 moment of truth is when a consumer, somebody like us, we've done some research about some product that we want. Maybe it's a new guitar, right? Say I need to buy a new guitar, and I go to Google and I type in what's the best acoustic guitar for me to buy? Well, all these guitar companies will pay huge amounts of money, thousands and thousands of dollars, to make sure that when I type that question in, they are at the top of the feed, that they are the first thing on the search engine result, because that is the zero moment of truth. When I want to buy a guitar and I'm about to hit purchase, right, on the internet to buy that guitar, that's the zero moment of truth. Well, for us as pastors, for us as church leaders, our zero moment of truth isn't when somebody's researching a product, but it's when they are researching questions about faith. It's when they're researching questions about hope and encouragement. It's when they're looking for some sort of truth that will help them get through whatever situation they're in. That's our zero moment of truth. When people are literally typing in, how do I find hope in the middle of a pandemic, or how do I save my marriage? And so we need to, the marketing and branding that I encourage churches to do doesn't require any money. It's just about tweaking little things with the way that we currently do things online to make sure that we get higher up in the algorithm of Google and YouTube, so that when people type those questions in, they're not just getting a random answer from some American YouTuber who doesn't talk about faith at all, but they're getting a message that Charlie has preached on how to find hope in some church in Brazil, right? And that's the thing that pops up first on their feed. But in order to do that, we don't need to spend any money at all. We just need to be smart and innovative about how we place that content online.
And intentional at the end of the day. I mean,
intentional.
Intentional.
It's that go idea, right? We've got to actually go and be intentional and strategic about it.
Yeah. Now, okay. Now we have our gravity is to focus and invest in in-person services. Most of the churches are either already with in-person services, beginning or getting ready for it. Yeah. How do we maintain the balance between in-person and online services? I mean, why would you say it's important to actually keep the effort with online production and not just rebroadcast our in-person services?
Yeah, well, part of the reason I would say that is that we have to look, and here's the deal. I know that the people in this room who are watching this Zoom call are a lot smarter than me when it comes to church. And you guys are very strategic. And I know that you're probably already aware of some of this stuff, but I think it starts with church leaders being really truthful with ourselves about what's been happening over the last couple of years. And the reality is, Charlie, yes, people stopped coming to church when COVID hit because we had to close our doors and we had to go into lockdown. And, I don't know what it was like for the people who are watching in their communities, but that's why a lot of churches went to it, because we had to close our doors for a certain period of time. But the reality is, studies show, and this is studies from around the world, from North America, South America, Australia, the UK, show that the number of people who were attending our church service was declining, going down for years before COVID hit. Years before 2020, attendance was starting to go down, and not just down in one or two people, it was down significantly. And here's the thing. I read a study last year that said that in 2019, at the very start of 2019, so about a year before COVID really took off, the number of people who attended church every week, like Christians who attended church every single week, was only 22% of all the Christians. So that means 78% of the people who you would say are part of your church community, they weren't coming every week. So even Christians weren't attending church. Even churchgoers weren't attending church anymore long before the pandemic hit, right? So online is a way for us to stay connected with them. And again, the studies and the experience that I've had as an online pastor tell me that while people might come week one, on week two, they might listen on podcast. On week three, they might watch it on an app or your website. And on week 4, they might just, watch it on YouTube or something like that. And so we need to be continually pushing this idea of church online and this hybrid church model, because it was happening long before COVID hit. People who, I think church leaders who say, okay, COVID's over now, we can go back to just in person, they're not going to see any growth. In fact, I would say they're going to stay well below what they were before COVID, because the reality is church communities, families in your community got used to the fact that I can just watch church online and it's still the same thing, and I can have community. Now, again, hear me say that I'm not saying we should give up gathering together like Hebrews 10:25 says. No, we have to do that. And I don't think people, but the thing is, I don't think people were not gathering together. They just weren't necessarily always gathering in our church building on Sundays. They were gathering together in homes during the week in their small groups, in their connect groups, whatever you call it at your church. And then they were listening to our content on podcasts while they commuted to work. They were watching our content on our message content on YouTube or on our websites. So in that way, I really believe long before COVID, church attendance wasn't decreasing, it was decentralizing. They were accessing our content through online digital means, but then meeting together in communities. This is certainly what we experience at North Point. This huge church in Atlanta, which, in America, for those of you listening who aren't aware, we call it the Bible Belt. Like, this is the place where most people go to church. But even those people weren't going to church long before the pandemic. And we noticed at North Point, our attendance was decentralizing. People were going to small groups on a Wednesday, but they weren't always coming to church on Sunday. They were accessing the content in other different ways, usually online streaming of our service, or YouTube, or messages on our website.
Wow, just that concept of decentralizing is so eye-opening, I would say, because most of us would say, no, if they didn't come on Sunday, that doesn't count. But still, people are looking for different ways. So you believe that we should balance our online and our in-person?
Yes, we need to find what that balance is in your local community context. But it's important to do both. And here's the best explanation I have, which is probably not a very good one. But I use online dating as the model, right? When I first became a pastor and was performing wedding ceremonies, right? I would ask the couple, hey, how did you guys meet? And they would tell me the story that they met at work, or they met at church, or they met at school, or, something like that was in person. But as it extended, the longer I did weddings for, towards the last couple of years, me doing weddings, what I noticed was more and more couples were meeting online before they got married. And that became the majority of ways that people met together. But in order to, it's all right for you to find a partner or start dating online. But if you're going to take the relationship to the next level, you have to meet in person at some point, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so that's what it is in church. I say, what church leaders need to realize is they might connect with your church first online, but then ultimately it has to lead to in-person. So we have to be strategic about how we get people through the doors. Wow,
that's so good. Let me just continue a little bit on this part, the balance between on-demand and in-person and online. Do you think that churches should put their services on demand instead of on a specific time? Do you think churches should put the whole service, or they should adapt to online? As a community, people who go online, they like different things. It might not feel the same. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So two really good questions in there. Okay. So I'll answer the first one first. Should we be doing on demand? I think if your community is still in lockdown or again, I don't know what the government regulations are necessarily, but for example, here in Australia, many parts of Australia are COVID free at the moment. And so our churches are fully open. But every now and again, because one or two cases will pop up, the government will shut down an entire city or an entire state, right? Mm-hmm. And churches in that moment need to go back to online. So when it comes to those sorts of things, if you're not able to open up your doors, I would suggest pushing it out on demand, like pre-record the service, upload it, and then set it to go live at a certain time, but then just let people watch it at any time. Don't do it exactly at 9:00 on a Sunday if that's what you always did. And the reason for that is simply that we live in an on-demand culture. right? That's the reality of the world. Netflix, and nobody watches TV well, I know I don't watch TV at the time that the show's on anymore. We all binge watch things on streaming services like Netflix, right? And that's just become what we're used to. And because that's what we're used to, people don't necessarily want to have to wait. It's not as convenient anymore to wait till 9 o'clock on a Sunday, which is really church tradition. It's not biblical theology to meet at 9 o'clock on a Sunday. It's just church tradition. And church tradition starts because somebody decides to make it start. So at North Point, what we found was when we went into lockdown, over the first maybe 5 or 6 weeks, we saw our viewing start to drop as people just got sick of doing video church, right? We're all zoomed out. We all have Zoom fatigue. But when we made our messages, our services available at 7 a.m. on a Sunday and just said, hey, watch it whenever you want, what happened was views went back up again because people were watching it at 7:30. People were watching it at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. We just let them do it. And then we just tracked who was watching it and how many people were watching it across a 24-hour period rather than just that 1 hour. And so it just made it more easy and convenient. Now, the second part of your question was, should we put the whole service up or should we put just the message up, right? So if you're live streaming, did I get that right? Is that the right question?
Yes, actually, I could add a little bit to that. I mean, do you believe we should have a different script, a different topic, different series? I mean, I've heard churches who created online campuses. We have heard a lot of different options. But what would you say to that part? Should it be just a copy paste, or what would you recommend?
So what I recommend is this: if you're live streaming your services, great, live stream the whole thing, but maybe change the way you do it. I would put the message up front and put the worship at the back instead of, in-person church, we do it the opposite way. I would switch it and make sure you put the message up front because people who want to, I think the only thing that church online struggles with is worship, right? It's awkward. Yeah. And every worship leader who's watching this right now, I know you've got a picture in your head that people are in their homes around a computer or a TV and they're standing up in front of their lounge and they've got their hands up in the air when worship is happening. The reality is, and I hate to say this because I'm a musician and I love playing in church, but I think what I learned is the reality is people are making breakfast. People are wrestling with their kids during worship. They're not responding in that way. So I would say put the message up front and then put the worship at the back during your live stream. That's what I would do to keep those views up. But after that, I would say make sure that your message stays online. Now, again, not knowing what the legal ramifications are in South America, but in America, in Australia, there's copyright issues around YouTube, around any song that gets performed. And so I've heard of churches that have had their YouTube channels, their Facebook channels shut down because of the music. So I just say, edit the music out, just put just the message out. Because when you're doing just the message, it gives people first of all, you're not going to get copyright strikes. Second of all, it gives people the opportunity to multitask. I don't know about you, Charlie, but often I'll listen to a podcast message on my phone while I'm driving or while I'm cooking breakfast for my kids, or if I'm cooking dinner, or, we multitask. So just having just the message up allows people to listen to the audio while they're multitasking. And we've just gotten, as a people, we've just gotten much better at doing that. So for two reasons, I would say, if you have the capacity, make sure you just leave the message up on your YouTube channel or your app or your website, whatever it might be. And I would go one step further. Charlie, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm assuming you watch YouTube, yeah?
Yeah.
So if something breaks in your house, say the door handle on that door behind you, say the handle breaks, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to YouTube a video on how to fix that door handle, right? And YouTube gives you 3 options. And one video is 2 minutes long. The next video is 7 minutes long. And the video after that is 35 minutes long. Which video do you watch?
I will watch the 2-minute video at first, of course.
Yeah, of course. We watched a 2-minute video, but what churches do is the only content they put up is a 35-minute message, and they wonder why nobody's watching it or watching all of it. They're only watching a portion of it, and they wonder why. Well, what I say is repurpose on purpose. There are communicators on this call right now, right? Pastors, lead pastors, senior pastors, teaching pastors who spend their whole life creating this incredible content, incredible, faith-filled, theologically accurate, super helpful content. And then they put that on YouTube, and it's frustrating when they only get 10, 20, 30 views. So repurpose that content on purpose. Edit out one point that you've made in that message, in that sermon. Edit out one point of that that's maybe 4 minutes long, and then put that on YouTube separately, and use that as the first step for somebody in the community who's never watched it before. Just make that as the first step. Here's a 4-minute taste, and then you can use YouTube cards, YouTube descriptions, YouTube end screens to drive people to the full length message. So you give them the help that they might need around a specific point in that 4-minute video, but then you help them get to the next bit, which is the whole 35-minute message. And then that leads to the whole series that you're preaching and that you're creating. So rather than your content going out and being used just once on a Sunday in person, you can use it multiple times online by chopping it up, by editing it, and just pushing that video out in smaller chunks as well. We started doing that with Andy Stanley a couple of years ago now, like about 2.5 years ago. So we would take Andy's 35-minute message, we'd chop it down to maybe a 5-minute version of that where it was 1 point. And then we went one step further and created a, 60-second or 2-minute version of a point that we pushed out onto Instagram, that we pushed out onto Facebook, so that people were stepping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And we were making it easier for people to take that first step on their faith journey. That first step on their faith journey wasn't a 35-minute message that they had to watch on their phone while they were on the bus. It was a 90-second clip that they saw on Instagram, which led them to a 4-minute version of the message on YouTube, which led them to the 35-minute message on a website, which led them to watch the whole series back on YouTube.
Well, that's just that. It's incredible. For example, I had a conversation with the church at the beginning of the week, and I was telling them, did you know that just the fact to ask a person to subscribe to your channel, to click on to like it, it's a step on somebody's faith.
Huge.
And we need to believe that and count it, because we feel that the only step on faith is ask or baptism. I mean, that's a big step, but for people to get there, they have to do all these little steps.
Exactly.
Do that.
Exactly. And that requires strategy. That requires intentionality, right? You have to be intentional about it. And again, because I know for a fact that some of the best preachers in South America are on this call right now, why don't you take one point out of that awesome message and post that as the first step that leads them to the second step, which leads them to the third step, which ultimately our goal is that those little steps will lead them to come into our church building, meet them in person, take their online dating to a physical relationship, right? And then it leads to baptism, then it leads to salvation, then it leads to, them changing their life as they follow Jesus. But it starts with that one step. And we have the opportunity now to be super intentional about that, right? In the old days, I don't know about you, but I remember bribing my friends to come to church with lunch. Like, I'll buy you lunch if you come to church with me. And you would see them, I don't know, because it's like an hour and a half out of my day. I'm going to have to sit through this boring message and this worship I don't understand. Well, now it's easier than ever for us to share our faith because of online tools. We have to keep remembering right here, everybody in your church, not just church family, but in your local community, they are carrying with them every day in their pocket a church pulpit where somebody can preach from, a worship team where they can listen to worship music, and also an offering plate where they can be generous. And they carry it in their pocket every day. We as church leaders, we as pastors need to be on this so that they're carrying us around every day. So when they're looking for that thing to help them with whatever situation they're going through, we can be there in that moment of truth to speak the word of truth over them, instead of just some random YouTuber who's not interested in their life journey, who's not interested in caring or pastoring them. They're interested in making money and investing in wealth. But for us, we have to make disciples and invest in people. And I believe this is the best way to do it.
And discipleship is not only 1 hour a week. I mean, it's like you said, it's the whole time. Now, let me tell you a little bit, and probably you know this. In Latin America and Brazil, our culture, our societies, we're not big on budgets and stuff in churches, okay? So regarding production and quality, how would you say that you can actually keep an excellent online production without actually, needing huge resources? You gave an example with the 0 moment of truth, but is there anything else you could actually tell us about that?
Yeah. So, a lot of churches struggled when it came to delivering services online, because they felt like they needed to have these really expensive cameras, and they felt like they need to have all this lighting and production and all that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Yet, the interesting thing to me, Charlie, so, I'm sitting right now in my office at home, right? And I've got some pretty blue lights behind me over here. And, I've got a ring light here, right, to get this shot that I hope looks good. Yet from what I can see, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like you're sitting in front of a window.
Yep.
And your lighting is probably better than mine.
Completely,
and you're not paying anything.
Natural.
You're not paying anything for it, right? God is providing your lighting, whereas I've got this lighting company providing mine, and yours looks just as good, if not better. And then I've got this microphone here to try to make my voice sound better, but you're using a headset. Mm-hmm. Like this is the thing. We don't have to go out and buy, spend huge amounts of money and dip into our budget, our church budgets, to get all this gear. Most of us already have it. We all have a camera on us every day. We all have a microphone on us every day. We all have light that, praise Jesus, is provided for us every single day, right? So I think it's less about the product, the production side of things. I think it's less about the production. It's more about the content. And it's also more about the context. There's a thing on social media that says content is king. I now believe context is king. Context is king, because content is the most relevant thing. But in church, I think we've messed that up. We've got confused about that somewhere along the line. We think relevant is having really pretty lights in the background and wearing deep V-neck shirts and skinny jeans, and do you know what I mean? That's what we've turned, and smoke machines in our church. That's what we've turned into relevance. But the reality is, Charlie, if I'm stuck in the middle of the desert, right, and you come up to me and you give me a drink of water, you're the most relevant person in the world to me, because you met my need in the context that I was in. And this is why I think context is king. And so if we as church leaders, if we as pastors can meet the needs of people in the context in which God has called us into, the community that we're in, right? Then we become relevant. And it's not about great production. It's just about us being genuine, us meeting the needs of people, and us being relevant in those 0 moments of truth, right? Now, if you wanted to improve one thing, I want to give one tip, one super practical tip, apart from sitting in front of a window so God provides your lighting. People will put up with bad video, but they struggle to put up with bad audio. So if you're going to spend money on anything, I would say spend money on a really good microphone. Now, you don't have to buy something like this, right? You can buy small microphones that fit into your phone now that will increase the quality of your audio 100 times. And that costs as little as $50. So if you were going to spend money, I would say focus on the audio verse first. There's this thing in production world called AVL, audio visual lighting. Audio comes first, and it comes first for a reason, because that's the most important thing, right? We often think in the church that faith comes from seeing, but no, scripture tells us that our faith comes from hearing. And I think there's something to that, right? Our faith comes from hearing. So we have to make sure that our audio is as best as it can be.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, you mentioned something about 167 hours during the week. How can we keep the relationship, the conversation during the week? Because I mean, as a pastor, we're used to at the end of a preaching just say, "See you next Sunday."
Yeah.
How can we? I mean, social media it's on 24/7. How can we? And you mentioned that, and I feel it's important. How can we keep the conversation going during the week?
Yeah. So I think ever since I've been a Christian, which is longer than I'd like now because I'm getting older. But I've been in churches where at the end of the message or at the end of the service, somebody gets on stage and says, "Hey, thanks so much for coming. We'll see you next week." And in the modern world, back then it was totally fine because that's how things happen. We gathered together the next week. But as I said, with church attendance declining, 22% of churches only, 22% of Christians only 22% of Christians attending church every single week. We need to rethink the way we do that. And so at North Point, one of the things we shifted and we started to change was we changed our languaging to cast a vision around this idea that we want to stay connected with people. So it moved from, "Hey, thank you so much for coming today," which requires in-person attendance. "We'll see you next week," which implies we're only interested in seeing you on Sundays. And we changed it to, "Thanks so much for being part of our church today," more inclusive of online or more inclusive of people listening on a podcast. "Thank you so much for being part of our church today. We'd love to see you during the week on social media," or "We'd love to stay connected with you during the week on social media." So we were casting this vision that we don't want faith to be just a Sunday thing. We want it to be an all day, every day thing. And we want to help you by connecting with you on social media. So it simply became, "Thanks so much for being part of our church today. We hope to see you during the week on social media." Simple little shift makes a huge difference.
So you would say that discipleship is possible online. I mean, 100%. It should be part.
It has to be. It has to be, Charlie. We have to stop using social media and technology to simply invite people to our events. That's what churches do. Come this Sunday, come to this class, come to this event. We have to stop using it to invite people to events and start using it to invite people to life-changing conversations. We have to have those conversations online. There was a pastor in Texas who I was doing some work with who early on in the pandemic, he had a church of about 400 people and he would stream his services online every single week. And he contacted me and said, "Hey, you got to help me with something. I've been doing this for 4 years. I'm getting like 80 views on my YouTube channel. I want to pack it in." But then in the first couple of weeks of COVID, I went for a walk with my dog. I got my phone out and I got onto a YouTube live stream and I just said, "Hey, if you're watching this and you need somebody to pray for you, I'm just going to spend the next 45 minutes walking around my neighborhood with my dog and I'm going to pray for you." And he got inundated with people who needed prayer in that moment in their context, right? And he said to me, "I don't know what to do because I was getting 80 views on a message that took me all week to prepare. But when I just got online and did a 45-minute walk around my neighborhood with my dog and prayed for people, I got 18,000 views." He's like, "I don't know if I ever want to do a church sermon again." But I said to him, that's because you're meeting a need in that moment. So the simplest thing I would encourage all the pastors watching this to do is figure out a day during the week when you can just go live online and say something like, I've got a bookshelf over here, right? Here's one of the books I'm reading this week, and it's really helped my faith in this way, and I believe it can help your faith in this way practically today. If you just did something like that, it doesn't have to be a full-length message. It just needs to be you're a shepherd, and the sheep want to know what they can do to take the next step in their faith journey. If you tell them what steps you've taken, they're going to follow. It just needs to be real and it just needs to be authentic. Last night, Charlie, I was out speaking with some church leaders here in Australia, and somebody asked me exactly the question you asked me. And I said to them, I think what you need to do, and it was a husband and wife couple. And I said, and they were telling me how they have this devotion every morning and should they live stream their devotion? And I said, no, don't live stream your devotion because that's private time between you as a husband and wife, but it's also private time between you and God. But what I would suggest, and they said to me that after they do that, they go for a walk on the beach. And I said, so why don't you, on the way from the car to the beach, do a 2 or 3 minute video that you live stream to Instagram or live stream to YouTube, where you just say, hey, so today we read Matthew 17. And one of the things we got out of it, one of the things God said to us was this, and this is how we think it can help your day today. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Remember, faith is not just about Sundays. And they were like, we're going to start doing that next week. Because it can be just as simple as that for us to be in people's lives every single day.
And you don't need a whole production team, a whole budget, five staffs. It's just you.
No. Charlie, how many times have you and I met face to face?
Like 3 times.
Like 3 times. But how many online conversations have we had with each other? I've lost count. Whether it's texting, Zoom calls, whatever it might be, we've had multiple connections, and that's why we've got a friendship, right? It wasn't the 3 times kicked it off, and they enhance it, but we keep it going through online means. And this is what we have to do with our faith, and this is what we have to teach people to do with their faith, right? And the biggest fear I think pastors have around this is if their people get online, then their people are going to stop watching their messages, and they're going to start watching Andy Stanley, Craig Groeschel, all these top communicators in the world. But there is one thing that every pastor on this call right now can do that Andy Stanley cannot do, and that's serve the needs of the people in your community where God has called you to serve. Andy Stanley cannot do that. Yeah, I see. I'm looking at the chat, right? And there's somebody from Sao Paulo. I'm just going to use that. Andy Stanley cannot meet the needs of the people in Sao Paulo right now, but that pastor, you can meet their needs. That's the one thing. You can do that way better than Andy Stanley or any celebrity pastor ever could do it. So don't worry about your people going online. Just keep meeting the needs of the people in your community, whether that's Sao Paulo, whether that's Veracruz, Mexico, or if that's Colonia, Uruguay. Just keep meeting the needs of the people in your community in that context and leverage online to do it.
Wow. This is just so good. Thank you very much, Dave. I mean, hybrid church, like we were talking, not just in person, not just online, but both. Can you list or just give us 3 principles, 3 tips of stuff, or if you have more, you could give us more, to keep in mind from now on? What should we keep in mind from now on that is not just in person, is not just online? What should we have in mind to keep doing that, to leverage?
Yeah, I would say keep speaking to both audiences, right? Hopefully you're going to have both audiences at your church, people who are in the room with you once you're allowed to do that, and people who are watching online or listening on a podcast or watching on YouTube, and just keep those people in mind. That would be my first tip. And the way that you do that is you say things like, and I preach like this whenever I'm preaching at my local church, this is literally what I say. Hey, for all the people who are watching, whether you're in the room right now, whether you're watching on a live stream, or maybe you're listening on podcast a week from now on your commute to work, or maybe you're watching 6 months from now on YouTube, there is what I want you to know is following Jesus makes my life better and has made me better at life. Like, I just call that out to all the potential audiences that could be watching. That's not hard to do. And it validates where people are on their life journey as well as where people are on their faith journey. Because you might have people who are sick and at home and bedridden, and so they can't be there in person. But if all you say is, we're so glad you are here with us today, there's an implication there that you're not glad that people are watching in any other means. And we have to shift that. We have to change that in some way. So I would say call out all those potential audiences as much as you possibly can. Second thing I would do is, if you're streaming your services, then you have a camera. So take the time to look into the camera every now and again, because you are making eye-to-eye contact with those people, right? If you're just looking around at the people in your audience, then those online people never get that connection point. So create those connection points by constantly looking at the camera. That's hard for people to do, Charlie. I'm going to call this out real hard, because we're so used to Zoom now. And a study came out that showed that when you're on a Zoom call, you spend 81% of the time looking at yourself. It's just natural, right? So for me, I've got a camera right here, but you are off to the side here, and I have to focus to maintain eye contact for two reasons. One, I'm not just the major one is this. It's only one reason, because I know that I'm not just making eye contact with you when I do this. I'm making eye contact with the how many hundreds of people are on this call. I'm making eye contact with them right now. If I'm just off looking at you, or I'm off looking at myself, I'm not making that connection. So when you preach in your church, make sure every now and again you just make eye contact and talk to the people who are watching online or who are listening on podcasts. Like just make connections with them as much as possible. And the last thing I would say is when it comes to communicating, remember that we've gone through a communication shift. When the internet hit, communication shifted in very similar way to how it shifted 500 years ago when the printing press was developed, right? When the printing press was developed, before the printing press was developed, only pastors had Bibles. The printing press gets invented. Now everybody's got a Bible. And so communication shifted because people could start reading scripture for themselves, right? When the internet happened and people started live streaming videos and things like that, we went through another communication shift. And so we often, I believe, need to change the way that we communicate online. The best communicators, the people who are getting the most views on a platform like YouTube are YouTubers. And they have a very clear and specific way of communicating. And I think we need to shift to change the same thing. That clear way is simply this, Charlie. Hang on 1 second. I'm so sorry. It's early in the morning here, so I haven't had coffee yet. So you go back to that video fixing the door handle, right? The way that YouTuber is going to communicate is they're going to give you what you need and the outcome of what you need right at the top of the video. Hey, so you need to fix your door handle? Well, in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to show you what you can do to fix that door handle and it will never break again. I'm going to watch that video, right? I'm going to watch that. But as pastors, what we do is, I think because of just, again, church tradition, we build up to our main point. But now when I preach in person, I give my main point away right at the start. I did this message, Charlie, at the end. I preached at my local church on the last Sunday of 2020, right? And so I literally opened up the whole message by saying this. Hey, everybody, 2020 sucked. It was a dumpster fire. We all can't wait to put it behind us. In this message, over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to give you one thing, just one thing that you can do to make 2021 the best year of your life. And then I started preaching. I had everybody hooked at that moment, right? Because I was preaching like a YouTuber. I think we need to start to shift and change the way we preach just ever so slightly so that we can keep people engaged a little bit longer so they can hear the message and then they want to come back and hear it again the next week and then hear it again the next week. Because how many of us watching this know that people don't always, it can happen, but people don't always get saved when they hear the very first message in their church. Our goal needs to be to get them to come back again and then to get them come back again, because faith is a journey, not a guilt trip. And we have to walk with them on that journey as well.
Wow. That's, that part, what you just said is so important, because we, most of the time as churches, we feel that need to actually save that person in 60 minutes. And at the end, you can't control spiritual formation for just 60 minutes. It's a whole life. Exactly. And what's important about what you just said is spiritual formation is their whole life. It's not just 60 minutes, and it's not just 60 minutes on every Sunday. It's their whole life. And so we need to be part of their whole life, right? And the reality is, when people are getting on their smartphone because they're waiting for the bus or because they're in line at the supermarket, they're not scrolling. They're not thinking to themselves, I wonder what's at northpoint.com right now. I wonder what's going on at whatever your church name is .org right now. They're not doing that. What are they doing? We all know the answer. They're scrolling through Instagram. They're scrolling through Twitter. They're scrolling through Facebook. That's why we need to be in those places. And this goes back to that question you asked really early on, Charlie.
Why do we brand or market on these platforms? It's so that when people are scrolling, they're coming across the gospel, they're coming across truth, they're coming across communities of people who are for them and who love them. And that's different in the world, right? That's different. You know, studies showed recently, Charlie, that in the US and it was the same in Australia, and it's the same in the UK. I don't know how it is in South America, but I'm going to assume it's the same, that during the global pandemic, 1 in 3 people admitted that they felt lonely a lot of the time. 1 in 3 people, right? So there are people in your communities, wherever you are right now, in Brazil or Uruguay or Chile, there are people in your community right now who may have 10,000 followers, but they don't feel like they have any community. Yeah. But you're able to provide that for them. You can provide them with community, but in order to do that, they need to see you. They need to stumble upon you on Instagram and on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, so that they can actually find that community that they clearly crave. So we have to be out there for those reasons, and we have to be in their life constantly, not just for 1 hour on Sunday, but for the other 167 hours of the week as well.
Churches need to be part of the community, not just a place to go once a week.
Exactly.
I agree with what you said.
That's how it was in the first century, right? In a first century synagogue, that's exactly how it was. And we need to get back to that.
Well, Dave, this has been great. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions. And we're getting ready to ask you some questions. But let me just, as we transition to the questions, let me just tell you what and I'm going to do what you just said. I'm going to look at the camera and let me tell you what I want you to do. Because we are going to put some links. One link is in Spanish, another link is in Portuguese, because we're going to give away 25 free consultations for the first 25 leaders who register. And during this consultation, we're going to be able to hear your vision, hear your story, what matters most to you and your team. And that way, in AEDI, the network, we can try to find a path in which we can try to help you reach the vision you want so much. So in AEDI, we have different types of partnership to different types of churches. We can offer content, community, coaching, and care for you and your team. We know you want to be a good leader. We know it's hard, and we just want to help. I mean, ministry, Dave, you know, it can be demanding at times, and we just want to get it right, you know? Now, let me just, I have this first question. Jonathan Fagundes, he's from Brazil. He's asking, how can we help our audience go from online to in person? Yeah,
Jonathan, such a great question. Thank you for asking it. I just think we need to communicate that, right? And the way that we do that is during our messages or during our church services, just saying, hey, here's how I put it at North Point every time we did, an online live stream. If I was hosting, I would say this: we stream our services to give you a window into our church, but also to create a doorway into community. And the best way to find community is for you to come and visit us at church. And I would love to meet you if you come. Please come and find me and ask for me, because I would love to meet you and buy you a coffee. That's how we do it. We just shift it. It's online dating again. It always comes back to online dating, Charlie. But if you're dating somebody online, you're making those connections. I don't know what the apps are. I've been married for 25 years. I'm out of the loop. But whether you're sending winks or whatever it is, eventually at some point, right, you have to say, hey, this relationship, I really like you. You seem to like me. Can we get together for a coffee sometime? You have to move it to physical, right? So do the same thing at church. Hey, if you're watching online, you've never been to our church before, I would love to meet you, hear your story, and buy you a coffee. Simple as that. That's, I think, the easiest way to do it. It's not about pushing content out on social media constantly that just says, come to our church, come to our event. It's about calling it out and making it personal for that person. Charlie, if we want to make a difference in the world, we have to be different from the world. And when it comes to technology, being personal is different. And so saying something like, hey, if you're listening to this message on a podcast and you live within, you live in our community, we would love to meet you one day, hear your story, and have a coffee with you. right? That makes it personal. So again, if we want to make a difference in the world, we have to be different from the world and leverage this technology just a little bit different. We're doing it right now. How many people use Zoom only to have business meetings? Yeah, hopefully we're doing something that is building and pouring into leaders as well. So just make it personal, Jonathan. Make it a little bit personal, and ask people to step away from online and into community as well. It's not devalidating online. It's just saying we want to take this relationship to the next level. So come and hang out with us personally.
Wow. Again, I'm recording this conversation, and we're going to have to come back to it, and we will put it on our YouTube channel. It's been so good. Now, I know the answer for this question, but and that's something you actually do. I've seen you do it in your social media. We get comments from people. Sometimes we get private DMs, and sometimes it's hard to answer right away.
Yeah.
But why would you recommend, because I know you do it, to actually take the time and answer every single comment you get? Why do you do it? Why is it important?
Yeah, because, it would be like, I equate it to something that happens in person. If you ask me this question, you're asking me it now. If I just ignored you, that would be awkward for everybody who's watching this, and it would be super awkward for you. You just asked me a question, and I'm just going to drink my coffee and not listen to you and not respond. I think we think that because it's on digital, it doesn't matter as much, but it matters more. There's a generation of people, my kids, for example, who are growing up knowing that the relationships they have online are just as significant as the relationships they have in person. And if you don't believe that, if you're still on the fence about whether or not that's true, think about cyberbullying. When a kid gets bullied on social media, for that kid, it feels as real as if they were being bullied in person. Yeah. Like studies show that. So it is real. And so we have to take the time and treat it like this is an actual person on the other end of that line. And we need to respond to them, even if it's just hey, thank you so much for sharing this content with your friends. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to read this and to comment. I 100% believe that every person who responds, every person who direct message you has to get a response. And as much as possible, depending on the size of your audience online, you should try to respond to every single message. Now, for me, Charlie, I know you see my Instagram all the time. I've got like 60 something thousand followers. I can't always respond. So if somebody just gives me a thumbs up, I will like it, but I probably won't have a comment because it's hard to comment to a thumbs up. I don't know what to say. I still don't know what to say. And I've been doing this for a long time. But if somebody says, hey, could you pray for me? They need a response. So I'm going to always, yes, not only will I pray for you, but I'm going to pray for you right now, or I'm going to pray for you for the rest of the today, or here's the prayer that I'm praying for you right now, and I'm going to type it out. That's what I try to do on my social media, because I think as church leaders, we have responsibilities. And it goes back to what I just said. If you want to make a difference in the world, you have to be different from the world. And they're following all these celebrities who will never respond to them when they make a comment. But as pastors, we have to make ourselves available to do that. Now, I know that for a lot of pastors, they're probably thinking, oh, great. That's one more thing I have to do. I'm doing too much in ministry as it is. I don't have time for anything. And now you're telling me I have to do one thing. Here's how I do it. I section time out on my calendar to make it happen. It's like, in ministry, this. I separate the time. You know this, right? Because you're in ministry as well. If every time an email comes in, ding, email comes in, you stop what you're doing, writing a message and go and email. You never get the message done, right? But what I do is I section the end of my day is now I'm going to respond to every email section. That's the 30 minutes of my day. And I just do the same thing with social media. I section out a part of my day and I say, now's my time to respond to everybody as much as possible. So it might go for, they're not going to get a response within a minute, but they're going to get a response from me to whatever it is that they're asking or whatever it is they're requesting from a prayer point of view. I make that my goal because I think it's super important. And the reality is, Charlie, you know this, right? Because you've been helping me with some of this because I'm trying to get some of my content put into Spanish because I've got so many Spanish and Latino, like so many Spanish speaking followers and Portuguese speaking followers. I'm trying to get it translated into that language because I want to meet those needs better. I don't have to do that, but I want to do that because I might not ever meet them. But if I can help them take one step in their faith journey and then direct them to a church that's in their local community, then that's what God's called me to do. And so I'm going to keep trying to do that as much as possible.
Wow. Thank you very much. Let me just add to that last comment. If a decision, a salvation, a spiritual formation is not one decision, it's many, several, tens of small decisions. The fact that you are sending a message, stop being anonymous to the church, it takes value, courage to do that. And not to thank the person and tell them, hey, thank you, I'm here.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Charlie, that's so wise. So wise. And I love the way you put that. It takes courage to step out from anonymity, right? And if we ghost them when they do that, if we don't respond to them when they take that, when they conjure up the bravery and the courage needed to do that, then it can be so hurtful. That's why it's so important that we respond to people. You just summed it up better than I ever could.
Dave, thank you very much.
Maybe I should be asking you the questions, Charlie. I should ask you the questions and you just take it from here.
Thank you very much, Dave. And you know what? I mean, I know you have shared that lately great series in YouTube called 1,000 Online Ministry Questions. It has a great insight and right to the point answers. Can you tell people how can they reach to you? Please, so they can follow you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, man. So, I've had this great experience of being able to work online for a long period of time at some fantastic and influential churches. And I just feel like God's telling me that I need to share that experience to help other churches and support other churches. So I started this thing a couple of weeks ago now called 1,000 Online Ministry Questions, where I'm trying to answer 1,000 questions because people have questions about what light should I buy? How do I section my time out so that I can respond to people on social media? Like those little questions, I get them texted to me all the time. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to record a video for every question that I get. So what I'd like to say to everybody who's watching right now, if you've got a question about online ministry, about digital, about podcasts, about YouTube, send it to me. The best way to do it is probably for South America. It seems like Instagram is huge in South America, right? Yeah. So I think the best way is probably just to DM me on Instagram. My Instagram is Aussie Dave, AUSSIE Dave. I've got so many followers who respond to me, Charlie, in Spanish. And I don't know, like a lot of the time I'm like, I'm so sorry, I don't speak Spanish, but they usually respond back in English and they help me out. I use Google Translate a lot. But yeah, ask the questions there and I will literally record a video answer for you and send it back. And hopefully it's helpful. And if you got a follow-up question, let me know. But I'm trying to gather these questions. And I just think the easiest way is either follow me on Instagram and DM me, Aussie Dave, or you can just watch. If you just want to watch and you don't have any questions, that's on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Aussie Dave. AUSSIE Dave, DAVE.
Thank you very much. And
no, thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, and if you want to continue the conversation, we can connect through info@aedi.al and to our YouTube channel as well. Dave, any last words to leaders around Latin America and Brazil?
Hey, you know what, guys? I would just like to encourage you. You guys have had such a tough year with COVID and everything that's going on. I know many of your countries were hit particularly hard. And I just want you to know this, you are seen by church leaders around the world. We're praying for you. I personally am praying for you. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, if there's anything I can do to pray for you, if there's anything I can do to support you, please don't hesitate to reach out, either on my Instagram, like I said, or if you want to email Charlie, Charlie, you feel free to give my contact details out because my heart is just to help you guys as much as I possibly can. And it's like that story in scripture, right? When the Israelites are battling and Moses is holding up his hands, and whenever his hands are up, they are winning, and when their hands drop, they're losing. I just want to come along like the two people and hold up your hands. That's all I want to do. And if I can do that by answering some questions, I'm more than happy to do it. Hit me up at any point, either Instagram or through Charlie.